Oh boy, this feels like it snuck up on me, but honestly, it's just time. In this particular area, felt like it went by quickly. So, the Kickstarter for Dreams of Fire goes live in a week. So there's actually a link down in the description for anybody who wants to set up an alert and to follow the campaign so that they get notified once it's live. You can do that. And so, yeah, let me talk about running a Kickstarter, because this is actually not my first rodeo. This is not my first time doing a Kickstarter. I did one previously with a book that I wrote before, which I haven't really brought up a ton in the context of these author diaries because I'm talking about a fictional work in these, whereas the book that I had already published was nonfiction. But it was called Skirting Gender, and it was about my own gender fluidity and my journey through, at that point, where getting to where I was with my own sense of gender. Things have evolved even further since then. So the book, even though it's on my to-do list to do an audio version of it, is a little out of date now. Anyways, but I ran a Kickstarter for that as well. Now, the purposes of these two Kickstarters is going to be slightly different because the main thing that I was doing with Skirting Gender was I needed the money to be able to afford to pay a professional editor to work with me on the book. In the case of Dreams of Fire, I already have an editor, and I've got that covered. What I need is something that's more or less self-imposed because I made the decision that I wanted this to be an illustrated novel. I don't know why. I don't know why that stuck in my head. And I'll talk about working with the artists and the illustrators in a later entry on this. But that's the main thing that's being funded. In addition to things like being able to, get advanced readers copies made and out to people who will be able to review it ahead of launch, get a professionally done world map, get a professionally designed book cover and all of that. But the bulk of it is going to be to fund the illustrations. But regardless of the fact that the specific element of publishing that was being funded being different between this and my last Kickstarter campaign, there are a lot of similarities. Now, this is only my second Kickstarter campaign. Fingers crossed it'll be successful. That'll put me 2 for 2. But what I will say is that while I do not consider myself an expert, I can tell you how I went about things and what worked for me. So the main thing for me in both cases was that the book was almost completely done before I even launched the Kickstarter campaign. I think the biggest mistake that a lot of Kickstarters, or at least ones that don't meet their goals, end up hitting is that they have something that isn't very far along. And depending on what it is you're making, maybe you can't be that far along. If you're trying to get financing for a short film, for a video game, there's only so much you can do without financing, but you need to have something to present. In the case of something like a short film or a video game or whatever, you need test footage. You need, something to show the vibe of what it is you're going for. Otherwise, you're talking completely in the abstract. In the case of a book, I honestly would say that you need to have a finished and multiply revised draft before you even think about going to Kickstarter. Because who wants to fund a book that's not even done? How do they know you're ever going to finish it? And so what that means is when I launch my Kickstarters, I make it very clear, this book is done. And even if this Kickstarter fails, this book will be released. It's just a question of how good and how finished and how polished will that release be. And that's what you're helping with. And that's your pitch to people. So what that means is that instead of asking for money to make a product, you're asking for money to better a product. And in the case of, I think, any written work, that's really a good way to go about it. Now, that's not the way all people who do these sorts of things do. I've taken part in a number of Kickstarters for graphic novels and things of that nature, and those will usually go before it's finished, usually kind of on the basis of, well, they need all their expenses paid up ahead of time before they can set aside the time to do this, if they're trying to make this their whole living. But, that's for people to talk about who run Kickstarters for those sorts of things. I'm just talking about the books. So when it comes to reward tiers, you want to have a sizable mix. Now, I've actually got fewer reward tiers on this than I do on, say, my Patreon. And the lowest amount is actually higher. So on my Patreon, I allow for contributions in any amount. And with the Patreon, there are tangible rewards at every level. Even at $1 a month, you get to vote in the polls and you see the docket a month ahead of time. You get early access to videos, etc. But if you donate more, you get more on top of that. With the book, I'm not really able to do that because honestly, the least that I can do is provide a digital copy of the book. And I did feel the need to make the minimum amount for you to donate somewhere at least close to the price that I would actually ask for a digital copy of the book. And that means that the lowest tier on support for the Kickstarter for the book actually gets you nothing tangible. You get my gratitude, absolutely. But that's the thing with Kickstarter much more than anything else. Tangible rewards are really going to be at the heart of it. So again, to contrast it with my Patreon, you don't really start getting anything that is something that is yours to have until, I guess, about the $10 range on the Patreon, because that'll get you a signed business card that I will mail to you. But prior to that, it's things like the polls and access to the Discord. Even getting your name in the credits of videos, that's just for the month at which you've paid to do so, and is, it's something that you get to see, but that's kind of it. So with something like a book, somebody funding is going to expect something more tangible. A copy of the book in some form, digital, physical. So those are your base level tiers. I have a lower end tier that's basically like, if you can't afford more, but you still want to help, this would help. And moving up from that is, this will get you a digital copy of the book. Then we get, very obviously 2 physical copies of the book, physical signed copies of the book, physical signed copy of the book, and signed copy of the world map. Because I figure at that point, if you're spending that much, it's not worth distinguishing between a signed copy of the world map and a non-signed one. And that's the other thing. You need to do your legwork and your research and price out what it's going to cost you to produce these rewards. So in my case with the books, I need to know what it's not going to cost me till I get to the physical ones, but I need to know what it's going to cost me to get copies of the book that I can then send out to the backers on the Kickstarter. Now, I have a baseline for that because I've done it before, as I said. But that you need to really be sure you go through all your expenses. Because like I said, even though the purpose of this campaign is primarily to fund illustrations, I cannot expect everything that I pull in to go towards that. First off, Kickstarter takes a percentage. And then there's all of the additional expenses. And in the case of a book, things that you can expect to have to pay money for are getting the cover professionally designed, unless you do it yourself, which if you don't have an art design background, I don't recommend getting an editor, at least one. You may need multiple depending on the nature of the book. Getting physical copies of the book, especially if that is a reward tier. So you need to know what it's going to cost you to get your own copies, because they're not going to be free. With various organizations, you can get them at a reduced cost versus what people paying who aren't you paying to get them are going to get. But it's still going to cost you something. So there's that you need to look into. If you want it to be available in bookstores, you need to get an ISBN number and you need to get a barcode, both of which cost money as well. Now, in my case, I've actually got some of those already, because when I bought the ISBN number and the barcode for Skirting Gender, I actually bought bundles because it was cheaper. That got me a little cluster of them. So I have ISBN number and barcodes that are simply unassigned, but I already own them. So I've actually got that covered with my last one. But if you weren't aware, those are going to cost you something. And You can still have a book released absent those things through certain venues. Like, for instance, if you release the book through Amazon, Amazon can supply you an ISBN number at no cost, but they are going to demand that it be an Amazon exclusive if they do that for you. So for my part, I'm not going to do that because I also want to set it up. I want it to be available in bookstores. I want that as an option. I want to be able to go to the library and see my own book. And maybe that's ego on my part. I'll totally cop to that. But if you're like me at all, what I have done, I've gotten into like a whole other thing now, but this is kind of related because I'm talking about the expenses that you need to think about. So I did the printing of Skirting Gender. I made it available on Amazon. My own physical copies I got through Ingram. And that Ingram is also how bookstores and libraries will get it. Because bookstores and libraries, most of them won't go through Amazon to get stuff. But all of these are expenses that you need to account for, especially when it comes to doling out your rewards. So, like I mentioned, some of the things on the higher end are a signed print of the world map. So I needed to know, as I was setting these tier prices, what's it going to cost me to get the world map designed? And then what's it going to cost me per print, like 8 by 11? So all of those things I needed to know before I even thought about setting tiers. And now the last tier that I set, you should always have, I think, one pie in the sky tier. And depending on what it is you're doing, how much you're able to offer will vary. So like, for anyone who's financing a film project, whether it be a short film or a feature film, usually the pie in the sky, high end, like $1,000 plus tier gets you an executive producer credit and a day on the set. They won't pay your travel expenses, but you get to do those things. And normally you couldn't do that. So I think, and I also have pie in the sky tier on my Patreon. I have a $600 tier in case anyone feels like they want to commission me to do an entire season of television for a show I otherwise wouldn't do, or like an entire film series. And somebody actually did it about a year back. Somebody took that tier to have me watch and review, in my case, rewatch, all of the Harry Potter films, including Fantastic Beasts, both of them. So what's nice about the pie in the sky options is A, they're kind of fun to think about. Like, what's something ridiculous? And then B, like, maybe somebody will actually do them. In the case of this one, the pie in the sky one is not as high as like my Patreon, which I said $600. Like, I literally never thought anyone would do it. But for this, my highest tier of support is $150. And what that gets you is all the other stuff that I've already mentioned, and you get to name a character. Now, because of the nature of that, there's only so many characters that I'm willing to change names on. I did have to cap that to a total of 10. That is the most that can be there. Now, I am also going to have to talk to these people, if they say, I want a character named Mr. Poopy Butt. No, that is not happening. So, there's some negotiations that'll go on with that. But that is obviously a tier that, even if I'm thinking in my head, not many people are going to do that. If I didn't put a cap on it for the number of people who could do that, then I could feasibly, theoretically, have ended up having to rename nearly every named character and start handing out names to characters who didn't have them before. So while it may sound like a good problem to have because it means like you got lots of money from lots of people picking that tier, it is still a problem. So that was the only tier I put limits on. So I've sort of just been describing the overall thing. The big thing here, the big takeaways are be very clear about what you are funding. In the case of a book, I really did have something basically done. And then just have fun with the rewards, but be sure that you price them and you know what it's going to cost you, so what you can realistically deliver. And that includes shipping. And Kickstarter actually has a lot of really good tools for this, including you can set dollar amounts. If they're getting something physical, there are additional fees involved to get it physically sent to them to cover the shipping and handling. And you can set different amounts for international versus domestic shipping. And you need to. Because I can tell you, domestic shipping for books, if you ask to have it sent media mail, is actually really cheap. Shipping international of anything is not. And I had to send some copies of Skirting Gender International. That ate a lot more than I thought it was going to. So do the legwork. Know what it's going to cost you. Have a realistic goal, and also have stretch goals in mind. In my case, it's basically going to be anything that I raise above what I am asking for is just going to fund more illustrations. I've priced it at a range where I can cover what I consider to be all the major key moments that I really want to have some kind of representation of. My ideal is to have an illustration for every chapter, but I wasn't going to set the price at that because of the nature of Kickstarter. You don't make your goal, then you get nothing. But I did want to have enough in to at least be able to fund all of the key moments. So, my Kickstarter. What's on it? My thoughts behind it. Link in the description. And in 1 week, I'll basically have my live stream on the Council of Geeks channel serve as a launch party for the Kickstarter. This is nerve-wracking. I'm not going to lie. Hope that was helpful. I'm not sure if it was. I really should have structured my thoughts more cleanly on this, but I didn't. Oh, well. Even if it wasn't, I hope you still had fun listening. Usual stuff to do. Like, share, subscribe. Check out the link to the Kickstarter. Also, Patreon and all that stuff. I'm asking for a lot of money. Regardless, you don't have to do any of it because we like to take a relaxed attitude around here. So just come on back next time you need a break.